Talking about the state capture inquiry, amongst other things now, the revelation by Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene that he visited the Guptas Saxonwold home on more than one occasion has left the country with more questions than answers. Now, which minister hasn't been to Saxonwold? And most importantly, what was really happening behind those walls? So on Wednesday, Judge Zondo said there are ministers, senior government officials and members of the National Assembly and the NCOP who have information but are not coming forward, and they might be called to come and testify at the commission. Now in studio right now, I'm joined by a political analyst, Aubrey Matshiqi. Thanks so much for coming through.
Good morning, Sakina. Thank you.
Let's start, I beg your pardon, struggling with this voice all week. But let's start with your view, your perception of the State Capture Commission.
Well, Sakina, my starting point is that by the time former President Jacob Zuma left office, corruption in the state was no longer endemic, but had become systemic, meaning it had become the dominant culture in the state. Now, to the extent that for years we've been hearing allegations against individuals and groups of individuals, one would have expected that the priority would be to lay charges and prosecute such individuals. But it seems the priority is to have these tribunals, commissions of inquiry, which to some extent so far, they are commissions of allegations, not commissions of inquiry. Because in what I've seen so far, the evidence leaders are not probing in their line of questioning. Those who testify are simply given an opportunity to restate allegations that are already in the public domain. So a lot of the allegations that have been made remain untested. Maybe as the process continues, they will be. But I also have a worry that because of no fault of the judges involved, either in the SARS Commission or the State Capture Commission, these tribunals have become an extension of the battle for mind share inside and outside the ruling party, which in part makes them branches of the court of public opinion. And therefore, the processes we are watching at the moment amount to what I call political theater. And that is why sometimes I think these commissions of inquiry or commissions of allegations should be staged at the State Theatre.
Oh, wow. That is quite a serious indictment because the narrative thus far has been about the good guys and the bad guys, the good guys seemingly untainted by corruption and all those sorts of allegations. They are the ones who have exposed the wrong, the rot that has been going on. And Nhlanhla Nene's appearance this week seemed to have cast some doubt in many people's minds if, social media and other commentary is anything to go by.
Well, Sakina, I've said this to you many times, and I will keep on repeating it until I have no reason not to repeat it anymore. We have this tendency in this country of reducing political battles to battles between angels and devils. And we therefore reduce our role to the role of cheerleaders, cheering on those we like. Whereas almost always political battles are battles between, as I keep on saying, angels with horns and devils with halos. And what they have in common is a God complex. But the most dangerous of these creatures are those creatures who are devils pretending to be angels. But I think one of the biggest problems we have in the discourse, not only about state capture, but in our political discourse in general, is the scourge of embedded journalism and embedded commentary. And here I'm talking about the fact that some of our journalists and some of our commentators tend to look at political reality through the eyes of those they like or through the eyes of their sources, and are not sensitive enough to the fact that political reality is created by both the truth and lies. And the best lie is that which contains a bit of truth. In other words, that lie becomes potent because of that bit of truth.
Speaking of embeddedness, I saw you wrote something recently about the Ascari element within the ANC. Now, that is a mind-boggling one.
Well, you see, the allegations against individuals are interesting. Some are a function of perception, some are a function of reality. And as I said right at the beginning, corruption, rent-seeking, and the looting of state resources are a reality that should worry both of us. So in what I'm saying, I'm not denying that we have a problem of corruption, rent-seeking, and so on. What concerns me as I observe the debate and the discourse is how narrow we are in our conception of state capture. And we forget that, especially in politics, words are not always what they mean. Words are not always what they describe. I'll give a simple example. The word stone is not a stone. So the two words, state capture, may not be state capture. But a meaning may be imposed on us, which narrows down our focus only to certain alleged perpetrators of state capture, instead of taking a wider view of what I believe is a wider phenomenon of state capture.
So what are you saying? Are you saying that this is potentially just us scratching the surface, the tip of the iceberg?
Well, I think what we call state capture is 10% of the iceberg that is above the water. And we are not looking at the 90% that is beneath the water. For instance, there is no state that is not captured. So by the time we start screaming state capture, the post-apartheid state had already been captured. In my view, the post-apartheid state is captured before the 1994 elections. And all we do is to look at certain forces and not others. We join certain dots, not others. Because for me, the challenge is to join all dots, not to join some dots in pursuit of a particular political agenda. So when I spoke about the Ascari element, I was trying to give a multidimensional explanation of state capture. And the argument I was making is that one of the things which brings us here is this Ascari impulse. I think it's more appropriate to talk about the Ascari impulse. An impulse which has made some of our leaders and members in the ruling party to be agents of looting. And here I'm not only talking about the looting of state resources, because remember, the looting happens in collusion with actors in the private sector and with actors in the global and domestic economy. And therefore, there is a certain, to a certain extent, what the Ascari element does is that you have what we may call moles that have been sitting inside the ANC since before 1994. And their goal has always been to destroy the ANC from inside, working with forces hostile to the ANC that are located external to the ANC. But you have others for whom the Ascari impulse is simply a logic of selling out, selling the country's resources to the highest bidders, locally and internationally.
Which is quite worrying, I must say. And now, Judge Zondo, he spoke about the fact that, not many people, especially in the upper echelons of government, have come forward. And then we listened to Nhlanhla Nene talking about having been to the Gupta residence several times. And that in itself was interesting because he had on a previous occasion indicated that he had met the Gupta brothers in passing, as it were. And this raises many questions about the silence of many top government officials. What's your take on that?
Well, the statement by Judge Zondo I found intriguing because the first thing which popped in my mind was a question. The question was, how does he know? How does he know that their members of cabinet were sitting with information. This is supposed to be a commission of inquiry. Has he made a finding that there are cabinet ministers and others who are sitting with information? So how does he know? That's the question that arises in my mind.
Well, perhaps I can't speak for Judge Zondo, but if one takes a look at, some of the leaks, the emails that have come out, the fact that many of our cabinet ministers and other actors within the political elite seem to have made their way to Saxonwold at one point or another, many on several occasions, finding themselves, attending Gupta-related functions, etc., etc. Isn't that a logical conclusion that can be drawn?
Well, maybe they went there because they love Martin Curry, The point I'm making is this. What Judge Zondo should restrict himself to is making the appeal that those who have information must come forward. Because once he starts saying there are ministers sitting with information who are not coming forward, I will keep on asking the question, how does he know? Now, when it comes to what we saw when Nhlanhla Nene appeared, my appeal is that as citizens, particularly those citizens whose job it is to think and to think about the meaning of political phenomena, events, decisions, and so on, is to suspend our sense of belief and disbelief. We must suspend it and approach these situations with an open mind. We must not be cheerleaders.
So just a final thought. So with everything that you've said this morning and your characterization of what has happened at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry to this point, would you say that given what we've heard thus far, what we've seen thus far, it's been a waste of time to this point?
No, I'm not that cynical. I'm cynical, but not that cynical. I do think that once some of the allegations start being tested, once people start being cross-examined, that at some point we may come across credible evidence, and people beyond the commission may be charged, prosecuted, or even convicted. If that happens, it won't amount to a waste of time, but who knows?
Well, thanks so much for stopping by, Koko Aubrey Matshiqi, speaking to us this morning about the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, which, of course, is headed by Judge Raymond Zondo. And that's what we're talking about. And unfortunately, I did indicate earlier, we sent in Dozi, we wanted to speak to him about the Nene testimony. Unfortunately, unable to get hold of him, but we, of course, will keep trying. But that's where we're going to leave it for now, and let's take a quick break.